Welcome back to Filling in the History. I am the amateur historian. Nice to have you back. Today we're going to be talking about the time frame of Section 64 through Section 66 of the Doctrine and Covenants. And the reason why I say that is because we've got 6 meetings that we'll be exploring those minutes from those meetings. We have an unpublished revelation. We have a license to William Smith. Lots of extra stuff. And as we go forward with this, by the way, there's going to be a lot less sections of the Doctrine and Covenants and a lot more of this extra stuff. And I'm going to try to fill in that history the best I can. But without going into a lot of the nitty-gritty details, as I have been doing on the sections, which is what I'm really focusing on to try to fill in the history of the revelations that we currently have printed in Scripture. So, yeah, welcome back. We're going to have a long parts 1 and 2. Part 3 will be kind of short, but this is going to be section 64 through 66. And before we get to that, we get a slip of paper belonging to John Burke. This is going to be a revelation that was actually held by him. So this is in the handwriting of John Whitmer, and the Burke family kept it for many, many years and gave it to the church back just in 1994, so not very long ago. As you can see, kind of a small scrap of paper. The historical introduction to this is from the Documents, Volume 1, says, on August 31, 1831, Joseph Smith dictated a revelation instructing 3 church members, John Burke, Erastus Babbitt, and David Elliott, to travel to the land of Zion in the fall of that year. The revelation was probably dictated in Kirtland, Ohio, where Joseph Smith had dictated another revelation the day before. The 31st August revelation did not provide further information about what the 3 men were to do in Missouri, whether they were to relocate or just visit, or what prompted this instruction, nor did Joseph Smith provide any background to the revelation. So this is, as it is, a scrap of paper, not a whole lot going on here. So who are these guys? Well, the historical introduction gives us this. Burke, Babbitt, and Elliott had mechanical skills that may have been useful in Missouri as the saints strove to build the city of Zion. Babbitt was a carpenter and millwright, Elliott was a blacksmith, and Burke may have been trained in sawmill operations. This 31 August revelation may be an instance of Joseph Smith acting on the promise from the previous day's revelation that the Lord would give power to Joseph Smith, quote, to discern by the Spirit those who shall go up unto the land of Zion, and those of my disciples that shall tarry. It appears, however, that none of the men followed the revelation's instructions immediately. So a great revelation, but apparently they didn't quite do it. And I find it interesting that this would be akin to what we do today, which we still do today, which is, as we would say, service missions. You know, you have some sort of a skill set that you use. We do this a lot with doctors and with people like this, people who are carpenters, millwrights, blacksmiths, and things like that, to go to certain areas to be of service. So it's kind of interesting that we, kind of still do that to this day. Further into the historical introduction, we get the scribe for the original manuscript of this revelation is unknown, but copies may have been made for each recipient. The only extant copy, which Burke retained in his possession, is in John Whitmer's handwriting. So it would make sense if you got a revelation, you get a copy of it, move on with it. So, yeah. Footnote 5 to the historical introduction says, in October 1831 and January 1832, Burke purchased land in Kirtland Township. Records indicate that Babbitt, meanwhile, was still in Kirtland in October 1831. In January 1832, Oliver Cowdery requested that Elliott and Babbitt relocate to Missouri, indicating they still had not gone. Burke eventually moved to Clay County, Missouri, and Elliott moved there in 1838, but it does not appear that Babbitt ever relocated. Apparently stayed in Ohio. So it's a very short revelation, so I'll just read it off to you. It says, behold, thus saith the Lord by the voice of the Spirit, it is wisdom in me that my servant John Burke, David Elliott, Erastus Babbitt, should take their journey this fall to the land of Zion, given August 31, 1831, by Joseph the Seer. And the Joseph Smith papers give us no footnotes for this little scrap of paper. So, pretty quick. And there you have it. So next thing we're going to get into is content from a meeting. This is from Minute Book 2, and this is a kind of an intense conference of people that got together. So here you go from Minute Book 2. This is from the 1st of September, 1831. This is a meeting that they had. It says, Brother Newell K. Whitney was ordained an agent unto the disciples in this land under the hand of Brother Oliver Cowdery. Upon testimony given satisfactorily to this conference, it was voted that our brethren Edison Fuller and William Carter be silenced from holding the office of elders in this church. By request of Brother Loren Page, the conference received his license as a priest. So apparently you got two guys being, as we would call it today, advanced in the priesthood, and two others who are being silenced, or they're sort of taking things away. We'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, a lot of like, I guess a little bit of dissent in a way, if you will. Footnote 2 for this says, an early convert in Kirtland, Fuller had engaged in what many considered to be spiritual excesses. One account claimed that Fuller, while lying on the floor, has been seen to jump up and cling to a beam for a while, and then drop like a log on the floor. This same account stated that Fuller and others received their commission to preach on a roll of paper handed to them from above, rather than from a group of elders as outlined in the Articles and Covenants of the Church. On the 6th of June, 1831, Fuller was called in a revelation to travel to Zion with Jacob Scott. Along the way, Scott, quote, threw down the Book of Mormon and jumped on it and said he would go to hell before he would preach it, unquote. So, they don't seem to be into the missionary thing, to say the least. So, we get this. Actually this is a footnote, but it's actually from the History of the Reorganized Church. Once again, my highest praise for them and for the wonderful record keeping that they did. But we get this. Little is known about Carter, but he was also called in the 6th June revelation to travel to Zion in company with Wheeler Baldwin. When that transpired is not entirely clear. A late 19th century history states that Jacob Scott, Fuller, and Carter apostatized and refused to go to Zion. Jared Carter wrote in 1833 that David Johnson, whom Fuller had baptized about summer 1831, requested rebaptism because Fuller had been under the influence of an evil spirit when he performed Johnson's baptism. In a copy of minutes from June 1831 conference that Ebenezer Robinson included in Minute Book 2, Denied the Faith appears next to both Fuller's and Carter's names. These parenthetical redactions were probably added after the creation of the original document. Yeah, so we got problems down there in River City, and Minute Book 2 explains those things. But again, high praise. Thank you so much for at the time, the RLDS Church History that gave us that. Footnote 4 we get, apparently the conference withdrew Fuller and Carter's authority to preach as elders in the church, probably by taking their elders' licenses. According to Webster's 1828 dictionary, to silence meant, quote, to restrain from preaching by revoking a license to preach. So they were using contemporary language for that. So it wasn't anything more than just like, I'm taking your license away from you. You don't get to drive anymore, so to speak, in our language today. So we get some content from the 6th of April meeting minutes. From Minute Book 2, we get this. Minutes of conference held in Nilson Portage County, Ohio, September 6, 1831. Elders present, Joseph Smith Jr., Oliver Cowdery, Christian Whitmer, Sidney Rigdon, Sylvester Parker, denied the faith. Upon testimony satisfactory to this conference, it was voted that Ezra Booth be silenced from preaching as an elder in this church. Oliver Cowdery, clerk of conference, I think is what that means, just in abbreviations. So here's another meeting on the 6th of September, a couple of days later, and Ezra Booth is out of there. So Ezra actually makes quite a lot of very wonderful contributions to the Joseph Smith papers in a way. So we'll get to that now. So from, again, Documents Volume 1, the historical introduction, on September 6, 1831, Joseph Smith and other church elders disciplined Ezra Booth during a conference in Nilson, Ohio. A former Methodist minister, Booth had joined the church in February 1831. Booth was ordained to the high priesthood at the conference held in Kirtland, Ohio in early June 1831, and received a commission in a subsequent June revelation to travel to Missouri with Isaac Morley, preaching along the way. Although he reluctantly fulfilled this assignment, he became increasingly disillusioned with Joseph Smith while in Missouri. On 8th of August, Joseph Smith dictated a revelation commanding Booth and others to return to Ohio, proclaiming the gospel as they did so. Booth later recalled that he, quote, violated the commandment by not preaching, unquote, on his journey home. But he accused Joseph Smith of neglecting the same commandment. So basically being like, yeah, I didn't preach by the way, but Joseph, neither did you, right? So that's kind of a legit thing if true, very legitimate. Further into this, after Booth reached Ohio on the 1st of September, he had several interviews with Messrs. Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, and Oliver Cowdery to discuss his belief that Mormonism was, quote, nothing else than a deeply laid plan of craft and deception, unquote. These interviews may have taken place in the few days leading up to this conference. A later Joseph Smith history states that Joseph Smith spent, quote, the forepart of September preparing to move to Hiram, Ohio, which may have necessitated a trip there. Ezra Booth was apparently living in Nilson, and since Nilson was just a few miles from Hiram, Joseph Smith and others could have met with Booth at his home at this time. Although the minutes are not clear, it is possible that this conference took place directly after such a meeting. Since the conference prohibited Booth from preaching as an elder in this church, 5 days after another conference had disciplined 2 other men in Kirtland, within a few days Booth began writing a series of letters critical of Joseph Smith and the church. The letters were soon published in the Ohio Star, a newspaper in Ravenna, Ohio, with the announced intent, quote, to prevent the spread of a delusion, unquote. Another newspaper in the area reported that Booth publicly renounced Mormonism at a camp meeting held in Shalersville, Ohio, later in the month. So this was definitely his choice. And footnote 3 expands on this just a little bit. It says, Booth was disappointed with several developments, including the small number of converts he found in Missouri, and his inability to preach the gospel with the same spirit and liberty he had experienced as a Methodist preacher. Booth recounted that before leaving Ohio for Missouri, Joseph Smith stated that he had been shown in a vision a great church that Oliver Cowdery had raised up in Missouri, consisting of, quote, several hundred converts, far more than the few members Booth found upon his arrival. There is no extant account of such a vision, nor is there any reference to this vision in other sources. Booth also resented having to walk to Missouri, while Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, and others received money to travel by other means. Furthermore, Booth said that he regarded Joseph Smith's spirit of lightness and levity, a temper of mind easily irritated, and a habitual proneness to jesting and joking as unbecoming a prophet. However, having said that, Ezra Booth is a very huge figure in church historical documentation. A lot of his anti-Mormon writings, especially through Mormonism Unveiled, actually give us a lot of our footnotes and fill out a lot more of the story that we have today. So kind of thank you, Ezra Booth. I think a bit of that honesty is very necessary. There's some of these things like, this vision of, hey, there's all these people there, and he gets there and that vision falls on its face. I have to assume that, there could have been revelations or other things that Joseph Smith did that weren't recorded. So I'm not dismissing this out of hand, but there's no current proof of it that it ever happened. But that's Ezra Booth. So that's the end of his membership in the church. He was actually a pretty big figure in the Ohio and Missouri missions, and then left shortly thereafter. But we do get a lot of cool stuff out of it. So, there's that. All right, so moving on to section 64, and that'll be the end of this part. So this section 64, it was kind of funny. I was going through this and started realizing that this is kind of another end of an era. This is the very last thing you get in the Book of Commandments. So this is the end of the Book of Commandments for us. So if you want to kind of know where it stops, this is where it stops. We get more in the Doctrine and Covenants, but anyway, there's also a very interesting appendix in the Joseph Smith papers about the Book of Commandments that we'll explore just for a moment. So we'll get to this in a second, but the first copy that we have is in Revelation Book 1. It's in the handwriting of John Whitmer. It is termed a revelation instead of a commandment, and we get verse numbering from W.W. Phelps. A lot of the editions that we get, were kind of fun out of this, are actually in the hand of Joseph Smith himself. So we get last name editions from a few people. So we have Isaac Morley, Ezra Booth, Edward Partridge, and himself. He actually adds Smith Jr. here. In addition, we get a couple of lines of text, which is kind of an interesting thing, which is usually done by Sidney Rigdon or others, but we get this. So we get until the coming of the Son of Man. So the whole phrase is, field now is called today, until the coming of the Son of Man. Those words were added by Joseph Smith after the fact. This one that is very famous in the church today, he that is tithed shall not be burned. And then Joseph says, at his coming. That is a very oft quoted scripture, but he that is tithed shall not be burned at his coming. That little addition there at the end was in the hand of Joseph Smith, which is kind of fun. The third one we get is, this is the Lord's business, Joseph adds, and he hath set you to provide for his saints in these last days. And then we also get that the inhabitants of Zion shall judge all things, and then Joseph says, pertaining to Zion. So a lot of clarifications that are rather important here. There is an editing mark that ought to be noted here. As you can see, it's kind of surrounding the word Ephraim, which is the end of this gathering and what was actually bound into a book. And that, my friends, in the middle of that sentence, is the end of the Book of Commandments. So if you've forgotten, there's a previous episode where I went into this in detail. But the printing press in 1833 was attacked by a mob. I mean, they razed it to the ground. They took the roof off. They busted the windows out. They threw the printing press out. All the furniture went with it. And they tried to burn as many of the copies as they could. And there was a couple of young women who went into the woods and actually saved the gatherings that were printed. And that's what you have in the Book of Commandments. But if you want to know, in mid-sentence, this was the last thing they were able to get off the press before it was attacked. So that now one kind of snuck up on me. But yeah, that's the end of that. So what you get here is chapter 65 in the Book of Commandments. And this is a partial copy because it ends on the word Ephraim, just as it is in Revelation book 1. And so that's the end of that. So we will put the Book of Commandments on the shelf. Before we do that, I wanted to pull it off the shelf just to kind of show you something that, again, I just wanted to give very high praise to this. So the copy of the Book of Commandments that I have is a reproduction that was actually done by the Reorganized Church. And I say the Reorganized Church before the Community of Christ because, according to our publishing date here, it was actually printed in 1972. So this little edition that I have goes back to 1972 before the name change. And what I love about it is that they had the Revelation book 1. And when I first read this many years ago, this is actually, again, I've been showing you these digital copies, but that Ephraim they show is where the Book of Commandments ends. And so the reorganization did a really, really great job of publishing this and kind of giving a history of what this little book is. So again, I might be gushing too much about these people, but I just can't say enough about how well they've done with record keeping, with preserving such important documents to so many people. So anyway, thank you for your service on the Book of Commandments. And this little book kind of started me on this church history journey. So I have to give credit where it's due. So now the Community of Christ, but whatever you may call yourselves, wonderful people. Thank you very much for what you've done. So that's the end of the Book of Commandments. So we're going to say sayonara to that. Just want to show you that. A little gushing there, a little gratitude. Very grateful because keeping histories is not an easy task. So anyway, but that's the end of that. So it is section 64 in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, full copy there. We also get a copy that was in the possession of Newell K. Whitney. It is in the handwriting of John Whitmer, very flowery handwriting at the very end that says Hiram and to Newell K. Whitney. But this is a copy of the Revelation written by John Whitmer, but it was in Newell K. Whitney's papers, which were later donated to the church. So we get a copy there, which is very nice. We'll get into the introduction on that, what it offers. There's also a copy in Sidney Gilbert's notebook. We've seen this one before. There's also a copy in the Hyde Smith notebook, which is Orson Hyde and Samuel Smith. It actually starts in the handwriting of Samuel Smith, and then it keeps going for the rest of the time in Orson Hyde's handwriting. So you can see the difference between the two. I imagined when I first read this, I was like, it's like, holy cow, dude, your handwriting is huge. Let me take over, and we're going to shrink the handwriting down so we can fit more on a page. But anyway, I'm making that up. Just amateur historian being a dork over here. But anyway, we also have Edward Partridge's Book of Commandments. And as I was first looking at this, I was wondering, like, why am I looking at a different Book of Commandments? What's the big deal? And what he does is really cool. If you flip over the page here, he writes in the rest of the Revelation on, kind of the paper left over and completes the Revelation. So I thought that was really cool. This is Edward Partridge's handwriting, and he kind of fills in the history himself. I thought that was really, really wonderful. We also get a copy of this revelation in the manuscript history, which we'll get to in a moment as well. And with all of this, with all this really important stuff, there is no difference of any kind between 1981 and 2013, except for the removal of the history of the church reference. Everything else is exactly the same. So I thought that was kind of remarkable. We really don't mention how significant this was to the Book of Commandments, which I don't know, maybe we're just trying to keep it to what the revelations are instead. So anyway, so further introductions to this from Revelation Book 1, we get 67 Revelation, Kirtland, September 11th, 1831. Directions to the elders, etc., etc. 11 etceteras. So that's from Revelation Book 1. The John Whitmer copy that we have, again, this is in the possession of Newell K. Whitney, simply gives given at Kirtland, September 11th, 1831. So not much there. Sidney Gilbert's copy is very brief as well. It says received at Kirtland, 12 or 11, September 1831. Right. The Smith Hyde notebook gives us a little teeny bit more. It says a commandments. Not a revelation. A commandment given at Kirtland, September 11th, 1831. And because this is our very last chapter of the Book of Commandments, I give you this from there. It says, a revelation to the elders of the church given in Kirtland, Ohio, September 1831. And thank you very much, Book of Commandments. That'll be the last one of those. Again, just the same. Revelation and time and the Doctrine and Covenants, not much there. So what we do get from the manuscript history is this. The forepart of September was spent in making preparations to remove to the town of Hiram and recommence the translation of the Bible. The brethren who were commanded to go up to Zion were earnestly engaged in getting ready to start in the coming October. On the 11th of September, I received the following revelation given in Kirtland, September 1842, 1831. So, anyway, mistakes made there. So, making preparations to move to Hiram. So, lots of hurt feelings surrounding this one. A lot of intense feelings leading up to this revelation. So, we get this from the Historical Introduction, Documents, Volume 1 from the Joseph Smith Papers. Joseph Smith dictated a revelation in Kirtland, Ohio on 11th of September, 1831, just a few days after arriving back from Independence, Jackson County, Missouri. Although the Missouri trip involved the identification of the site for the city of Zion and the dedication of land for the construction of a temple, it generated disappointment and disillusion for some. Despite high expectations, Oliver Cowdery and his companions had been unsuccessful in their attempts to preach to the American Indians, or Lamanites, west of the Missouri border. Their subsequent efforts among the white population of Jackson County, Missouri, yielded little success. Disappointment also stemmed from the designation of Independence, a rough frontier village, as the center place for the city of Zion. Ezra Booth, one of the elders called to travel to Missouri in the summer of 1831, also expressed disillusionment with Joseph Smith himself. Booth complained that he and his companion Isaac Morley had to walk to Missouri while Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, and other church leaders traveled by way of stagecoach and canal. Apparently, Booth witnessed a confrontation between Edward Partridge and Joseph Smith over the quality of Missouri land selected for purchase. Booth believed that Joseph Smith's conduct in these disagreements was unbecoming a Christian. Rigdon, likely referring to the same incident, placed the blame on Partridge, stating he had insulted the prophet in particular and assumed authority over him in open violation of the laws of God. Partridge was later penitent. The same minutes that contain Rigdon's accusation record Partridge saying that, quote, if Brother Joseph has not forgiven him, he hopes he will, as he is and has always been sorry, unquote. Booth, on the other hand, apparently became more resentful, and a conference barred him from preaching as an elder in the church on the 6th of September, 1831. And we've already talked about those minutes. Further to this, a week later, this 11th September revelation expounded on the necessity of forgiveness and specifically referred to problems involving Booth, Morley, and Partridge, indicating that the latter two were more forgiven for their sins. It also discussed preparation for the gathering to Missouri. The revelation clarified the relationship between Kirtland and Missouri. A previous revelation had established Independence as the center place at which to build the city of Zion, and this revelation declared that Kirtland, where the saints had previously gathered, would remain a stronghold for 5 years. It also identified what property should be retained in Kirtland, portraying a bright future for the land of Zion. The revelation offered encouragement to those who remained committed to the mission and leadership of Joseph Smith. So, yeah, some fighting words going on here and some hurt feelings. Very stressful time. And I'm just going to kind of remind everybody that's listening here, most of these guys are in their like 20s and 30s. So this is not like a bunch of old people fighting. This is, everybody's still pretty young. And so I think that kind of contributes to the fact that there's a lot of energy going on with this right now. So some content and footnotes from the Revelation. We get this from the Revelation itself. It says, I have given unto you the kingdom, and the keys of the mysteries of the kingdom shall not be taken from my servant Joseph while he liveth, inasmuch as he obeyeth mine ordinances. Footnote 5 to this says, according to a September 1830 revelation, the Lord had given Joseph Smith the keys of the mysteries of the revelations which are sealed until I shall appoint unto him another in his stead. A December 1830 revelation similarly proclaimed that Joseph Smith had, quote, the keys of the mystery of those things which have been sealed. If he abide in me, and if not, another will I plant in his stead. And this is a very interesting thing about a leader, especially that young. There's a lot of room here for Joseph to, die and have to, church moves on to something else, or that Joseph could blow it and actually lose his position as the leader of the church. So, and as the prophet. So it's a very interesting language here in these revelations and in these footnotes. So the text gives us a little further down. There are those who have sought occasion against him without a cause. Nevertheless, he hath sinned, but verily I say unto you, I the Lord forgiveth sins unto those who confess their sins before me, and ask forgiveness, who have not sinned unto death. My disciples in days of old sought occasion against one another, and forgave not one another in their hearts. And for this evil they were afflicted and sorely chastened. Wherefore I say unto you, that ye ought to forgive one another. Now, footnote 6 to this clarifies some wording. The word occasion here means opportunity of attacking, of fault-finding, or of giving or taking offense. The copy of the Revelation made by Samuel Smith and Orson Hyde has accusation rather than occasion. So, if you want, you can replace accusation with occasion in this particular case. And this is a reference back, just for full disclosure, this is a reference back to the New Testament where you have the apostles during, I believe it was during the Last Supper, sort of arguing with who was the greatest in the kingdom of God. And Jesus sort of said, no, the servant is the greatest, right? So that's a reference back to that in the New Testament. The Revelation further says, Behold, I the Lord was angry with him who was my servant Ezra Booth, and also my servant Isaac Morley. For they kept not the law, neither the commandment. They sought evil in their hearts, and I the Lord withheld my spirit. They condemned for evil that thing in which there was no evil. So what are we talking about? Footnote 14 to this says, a June 1831 revelation assigned Booth and Morley to travel to Missouri together, preaching the word by the way. Booth later complained that the Spirit did not enable him to speak with as great liberty as he expected on this trip. Exactly how Booth and Morley had defied the February 1831 revelation known as the laws of the Church of Christ is unclear. So when it says kept not the law, it's referring to this laws. It was a revelation, an earlier revelation. And so not really quite clear about what that was because the minutes are pretty brief. So there you go. So reading further in, the text gives us, and again, I say unto you that my servant Isaac may not be tempted above that which he is able to bear, and counsel wrongfully to your hurt. I have given commandment that this farm should be sold. I willeth not that my servant Frederick G. Williams should sell his farm. So what are we talking about? Footnote 17. Joseph Smith and Emma Smith had been living on Morley's farm since April 1831. A 30th of August revelation told Titus Billings, Morley's brother-in-law, to whom Morley had given power of attorney in June, to, quote, dispose of the land and send the resulting money unto the land of Zion unto them whom I have appointed to receive. Approximately 80 acres of Morley's land was sold in October 1831 to Ritchie and Hercules Carrel. Hercules. Great name. So further into the text we get, I the Lord requireth the hearts of the children of men. Behold, now it is called today, and verily it is a day of sacrifice, and a day for the tithing of my people. For he that is tithed shall not be burned, for after today cometh the burning. This is speaking after the manner of the Lord. For verily I say, tomorrow all the proud, and they that do wickedly, shall be as stubble, and I will burn them up, saith the Lord, for I am the Lord of hosts. Footnote 20 to this. Very interesting, I thought. No set process for tithing members of the church was in place at this time. Instead, the laws of the Church of Christ instructed members to consecrate their property to the church and receive back an inheritance. Over a year later, Joseph Smith stated in a letter to William W. Phelps that consecration was a way that God tithed his people. It is contrary to the will, I'll do that again. Quote, it is contrary to the will and commandment of God that those who receive not the inheritance by consecration agreeable to this law, which he has given, that he may tithe his people to prepare them against the day of vengeance and burning, should have their names enrolled with the people of God, unquote. And this is the joke in the modern church is fire insurance. That's why we pay our tithing. As a personal note, that's not why I do it, but I think it's kind of a silly idea. But it is definitely, there are a lot of references to this tithing being a protection against, this fire that should be coming, this burning that should be coming. So a little further down in the Revelation, we continue to get, behold, the Lord requireth the hearts and a willing mind, and the willing and obedient shall eat the good of the land of Zion in these last days. And the rebellious shall be cut off out of the land of Zion, and shall be sent away, and shall not inherit the land. For verily I say that the rebellious are not of the blood of Ephraim, wherefore they shall be plucked out. So why Ephraim? Footnote 28. Ephraim was one of the two sons of Joseph, son of Jacob, in the Old Testament. In discussing the duties of the elders of my church in early August 1831 Revelation, echoed language from Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 17, referring to the blessings pronounced by Moses on the tribe of Joseph. In October 1831, a revelation for William E. McClellan stated that he was, quote, a true descendant from Joseph, who was sold unto Egypt down through the loins of Ephraim, his son, unquote. In November 1831, Revelation clarified that the children of Ephraim were God's servants who would help gather the scattered tribes of Israel to Zion before the second coming of Jesus Christ. So that's a pretty big promise, and something I believe is pretty well known in the church to this day is this idea that the tribe of Ephraim is in charge of gathering in. And this is a reference back to the Old Testament when Joseph was the one who brought his family to safety inside of Egypt during the famine. And so I won't go too far into that, but this is usually a big conversation whenever somebody gets their patriarchal blessing. And especially if they're of the tribe of Ephraim or Manasseh or whatever tribe that they're from, there's these certain promises that are associated with it. So you'll see that reference to Ephraim quite a lot in Latter-day Saint literature. So our last quotation here from a content gives us this. And even the judge and his counselors, if they are not faithful in their stewardship, shall be condemned, and others shall be planted in their stead. Again, this idea, if you don't do your job right, you're going to be removed or relieved of duty. Footnote 31 to this says, in an August 1831 letter, Partridge commented to his wife, Lydia, that, quote, as I am occasionally chastened, I sometimes feel as though I must fall, unquote. Very humble man, very poor guy. He keeps getting kind of beat up and he keeps kind of blaming himself. And apparently Ezra Booth was very upset by that. So one of the reasons why he left the church. So that is the end of our section here, section 64. I did want to mention something here that is an interesting essay inside of the Joseph Smith Papers Project. You're going to see this in the Revelations and Translations section, especially about the Book of Commandments. So there is a section in here called what is the proposed sixth gathering of the Book of Commandments. So again, we're cut off mid-sentence, right? It says the word Ephraim, and that's the end of that, and we don't get any more because it was destroyed in this thing. They didn't get to actually print those things. So something we get here is their best guess, and there's some pretty solid research behind this, which I'll get to in a moment, about what would have been in the very last gathering and in the very last portion of the Book of Commandments. After that, who knows? But at least we know there was one more gathering that was planned. And we're getting a lot of this from Revelation Book 1 and some other things. So anyway, I'll just read off this from the historical introduction to this proposed sixth gathering. It says, "The Book of Commandments, as it exists today, is incomplete. When angry residents of Jackson County, Missouri, razed the printing office operated by William W. Phelps, Oliver Cowdery, and John Whitmer in July of 1833, sheets from only the first 5 gatherings of the book were salvaged. While it is possible, even unlikely, or even likely, that typesetting or printing of an additional gathering had begun, no known copy of such a gathering exists." So I did an entire episode again about this, about the young woman who saved these gatherings, and that's the reason why you have it today. But the Joseph Smith papers has determined, due to printers' markings, things like verse numberings, and what could have been in this sixth gathering of the Book of Commandments. So what's in there? And if you want to read it, go to the website, buy the book. It's all in there. I'm just gonna kind of give you the cliff notes here, the amateur historian notes here. What would have been included? Well, the rest of section 64, which I think is kind of obvious. And then it would have been section 66, then section 65. Flip those. Then section 68, 67, and 69. So out of order there as well. 68, 7, and 9. You would have received a partial copy of section 107 of the Doctrine and Covenants. So we're skipping way ahead now. But this is, I'm sorry, these numbers are based on current revelations. So you had, again, a partial of 107. Then it would have been 70, 71, 72, and 73. No 74. You get section 75. You get section 133. And that's the end of it. So just so you know. 64, 6, 5, 8, 67, 69, 107, 70 through 73, 75, and 133. Just those are the smattering of things that would have been included in this last gathering. And this is based on just research of print numberings, take marks, things like that were inside of the Revelation books. The last thing you would have gotten was a testimony of witnesses. And we have a copy of this, or what we think would have been in there. So I'm just going to read this because I think it's kind of interesting. It says, "The testimony of witnesses. The testimony of the witnesses to the book of the Lord's commandments, which he gave to his church through Joseph Smith, Jr., who was appointed by the voice of the church for this purpose. We, the undersigners, feel willing to bear testimony to all the world of mankind, to every creature upon the face of all the earth, and upon the islands of the sea, that God hath borne record to our souls through the Holy Ghost, shed forth upon us, that these commandments were given by inspiration of God, and are profitable for all men, and are verily true. We give this testimony unto the world, the Lord being our helper, and it is through the grace of God the Father and his Son Jesus Christ that we are permitted to have this privilege of bearing this testimony unto the world, in the which we rejoice exceedingly, praying the Lord always that the children of men may be profited thereby. Amen." And if that doesn't sound familiar at all to you, the last time they did this was for the witness pages of the Book of Mormon. So there's a lot of familiar language here, and Oliver Cowdery is once again involved. So kind of a fun thing, but that would have been the witness page. Again, it would have been in the back of the book, just like with the Book of Mormon. Footnote 14 shows that all of this actually comes from the Revelation book. So this version is based on the version in Revelation Book 1, page 121. A version of this testimony without the signatures was published in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants as, quote, "the written testimony of the 12," unquote. The punctuation of the text is based on that 1835 version. So there you go. So this is what it looks like. Revelation Book 1, page 121. This is the witness page that they would have used. And that is how they did it. So all of the revelations there that had, numbering, and they were sort of marked up, and they would have known what those were. We followed their pattern, those breadcrumbs back to what would have been what's called the proposed sixth gathering. So this particular part, I'm not going to get into too much, but it is not a transcription. It is basically the best guess about where the verses would have been, where the punctuation would have been, and so forth. So that is just a little offering and a little essay at the end, an appendix to the Revelations and Translations series. So there you go. That is part 1. Our next part, we're going to get into 5 meetings. I'm going to be skimming over those as fast as I can, plus William Smith's license as a teacher in the Aaronic priesthood and Doctrine and Covenants, section 66. So stay with us. All right, we're going to keep going in part 2 here, which is going to be 5 meetings, a license, and a section of the Doctrine and Covenants. So we get 2 meetings here. One is in September and the other one's in October. So we'll start here. September of 1831. Meeting held in the morning because Joseph Smith's family was moving to Hiram. So just like today, like, hey, I got to pack a truck, I got to pack my wagon, I got to pack a horse and mule or whatever, and we're moving today. So let's do this pretty quickly. So I'll just read off the minutes of this because it's pretty short. But it says, upon sufficient or satisfactory testimony to this conference, it was voted that our brethren George Miller, a priest in the Church of Shalersville, John Woodard, an elder in the Church of Orange, and Benjamin Bragg, a priest in the Church of Warrensville, be silenced from ministering in their respective offices. Oliver Cowdery, Clerk of Conference. And we get no detail about the heck was going on here. So that's all you get. So these 3 guys, it's like, hey guys, you don't get to be in your offices anymore. Like, give us your licenses back, you're done. Don't know what they did. Don't know why they did it. So I'm sorry, that's all we get from the Joseph Smith papers. October 1, 1831, we get another meeting, which is, just read the minutes off to you. Minutes of a conference held in Geauga County, Ohio, October 1, 1831. 9 elders present. The duty of the elders was declared by the Spirit to go forth and warn the inhabitants of the earth of the things known in the Church of Christ in these last days. Brother Joseph Coe and William W. Phelps were ordained to the high priesthood under the hand of Brother Joseph Smith, Jr., William W. Phelps, Clerk of Conference. Very simple calling and training for their missions. So congratulations, Joseph Coe and William Phelps. They were made high priests, and they got their commissions to go. So very simple calling. So yeah, like I said, we're going to barrel through these. Not a whole lot to be said here about these meetings because the minutes are all you get. And unless somebody else put it in a journal or some other publication, we don't really have anything for them. We then get William Smith's license. Now, William Smith is a brother to Joseph, and it says, and this is an interesting one. This is still held, as far as I can tell, by the Community of Christ. So what you're going to see here on this image that I have is that there's a watermark that I've kept here on purpose for the Community of Christ and giving them the credit for or keeping this and preserving this so well like they do. They're very, very good at this. So this is a paper that had become weakened over the years, separated at the folds, and pasted onto another piece of paper, basically, which is, it happens like having the same piece of paper. We don't really know if there's anything on the back side of this thing because it was kind of pasted onto this other piece of paper to keep it together, and so we don't really know what's there anymore. But we do get a source note for this from the Joseph Smith papers. It says, the license was received by the RLDS Church, now Community of Christ, in July of 1965. The document passed from William Smith to Isaac Sheen, an early supporter to William Smith's later claims to lead the church. Sheen gave the certificate to his son, who gave it to his brother-in-law, Oliver Ira Babbitt. Babbitt presented this certificate with other books to his friend Alvin Smith of Miami, Oklahoma, who gave them to his daughter. She, in turn, donated them to the RLDS Church. So, for all the hands that it passed through, everybody did a fantastic job keeping this one together, I think, all things considered. So, what's the content? It's very brief. It says, this is to certify that William Smith has been received in this Church of Christ according to the Articles and Covenants of this church, and ordained a teacher under the hand of Joseph Smith, Jr. This, therefore, authorizes him to act as a teacher in this church according to the Articles and Covenants given at Hiram, October 5th, 1831. John Whitmer, Joseph Smith, Jr., elders. So this is a license of a teacher. Now, just to clarify for those of you who may not know, there is an office in the Aaronic priesthood called teacher. So it goes deacon, teacher, priest. And then in the Melchizedek priesthood, you have a lot of things. You have elder, high priest, apostle, 70, patriarch. These are all offices in the priesthood. But anyway, so that's what he's referring to. Not just teaching stuff, but actually the office of a teacher. So from the historical introduction from this, we get William Smith held the office of teacher by at least 3rd of June, 1831. The issuance of the license in October may have been necessary because, as Smith later remembered, he was exclusively engaged in the business of my office at that time. This involvement included, quote, attending the numerous conferences and visiting the branches to see that the members were all faithful and that there was no quarreling or backbiting among the brethren, unquote. It is possible, though less likely, that Smith obtained a license at the time for his ordination and received this 5th October 1831 license as a replacement or renewal of the original. John Whitmer, who was assigned to historical and clerical responsibilities, wrote out the license, which he and Joseph Smith signed as elders. So sometimes you lose your recommend, as we say in today's church. But I will say, as of this moment, the renewals of that might come to an end because now we're thinking of doing all these licenses and whatnot, our recommends, as we say, digitally. So things evolve, things change. We'll see how that goes. But for many, many years, there's been a piece of paper that kind of says I'm authorized to do stuff for the church. So after that, we get 3 meetings. And I'm going to go through some of their minutes here. And like I said, in the future, I may not dive too much into this because there's going to be a lot more record keeping and a lot less revelations. And I'm kind of constraining myself to the things that people are a lot more familiar with and filling in the history for those. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But for now, we're going to be exploring Minute Book 2, first meeting that we have from October 11th, 1831. Certain points were discussed by Brother Joseph Smith, Jr., who said that the elders present were to tarry until the morrow and hold a meeting so that the members might understand the ancient manner of conducting meetings as they were led by the Holy Ghost. Also said that this was not perfectly known by many of the elders of this church. Exhortation by Brother William W. Phelps, Brother Oliver Cowdery, then made a move that this conference take into consideration the propriety of appointing 6 elders to visit the several branches of this church, setting them in order, and also make known the situation of Brothers Joseph Smith Jr. and Sidney Rigdon, and accordingly, Brothers David Whitmer and Reynolds Cahoon were chosen, appointed. The other 4 remained to be chosen hereafter. It was decided by vote that the General Conference meet on the 25th instant at the dwelling house of Brother Cyrenius Burnett in Orange, Cayuga County. Brothers David and Reynolds were then ordained to their office or appointment, and Brother Stephen Burnett, an elder under the hands of John Whitmer. Conference closed in prayer by Joseph Smith, Jr. So footnote 3 to this, I think, is kind of funny. I don't know why I think it's funny, but I just thought it was funny. It says, Cyrenius Burnett's home may have been volunteered for the forthcoming conference by his son, Stephen Burnett, who was also present at the conference. So I love this idea of like, well, we need to meet. Where should we go? And he's like, you could use my house if you want. And they say, okay. And so a general conference of the church is held in this guy's house. And I just think that's funny. So a little further into this, Right, so the historical introduction gives us this. The conference dealt with other practical matters as well, including ordinations, the scheduling of a general conference to be held later in the month, and the need for funds to support Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon and their families so that they could resume the work of Bible revision. Joseph Smith's later history explains that this 11 October meeting occurred when Joseph Smith was recommencing the translation of the scriptures in Hiram, with Rigdon as his scribe. Although both were staying in the Johnson's farm and therefore had room and board provided, they apparently needed means so that they could devote themselves full time to this effort. So the purpose of this meeting is a little peculiar. I can say words. Anyway, further into this historical introduction. Despite these pressing practical concerns, the conference opened with general instruction, including direction on the subject of conducting meetings, a topic on which Joseph Smith believed the elders needed additional instructions. Most were ignorant of the, quote, ancient manner of conducting meetings, unquote. A later Joseph Smith journal history explains, even though members had been counseled to direct meetings, quote, as they were led by the Holy Ghost. Although some instruction occurred in this one-day conference, the minutes mentioned a meeting for the following day to continue the discussion and apply the principles. So how do you run a meeting? What does it mean to run a meeting by the Spirit? I guess that was all part of this conference training that they did. So that's that. The 21st of October, 1831, there's another meeting about how William Cahoon, a 17-year-old at the time, quote, offered abuse to a 6-year-old by the name of Sarah Ann Whitney. Apparently, they tried to reconcile the issue, little is known about it, and that it was not satisfactory. So this meeting was held to deal with the situation, unknown what Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon decided to do with it. It's kind of weird. So the content of it is this. Prayer by Sidney Rigdon who called in question the case of two brothers, William Cahoon and Peter DeVolve, who were accused of some of their brethren of offering abuse to Brother Neil K. Whitney's little child. Brother Frederick G. Williams arose and said that he was at a meeting with the Kirtland brethren when Brother William Cahoon was present, who spoke at a considerable length by the Spirit of the Lord, as he supposed. And also Brother Peter DeVolve declared that he was filled with the Spirit of God, but had confessed previous that he did offer abuse to the child, but not to the satisfaction of their parents. Therefore, voted by this conference that it is their undoubted opinion, taking into consideration the testimony before them, it is therefore voted at this conference, send our beloved brethren Joseph Smith, Jr. and Sidney Rigdon unto the church in Kirtland to lay before them the decision of this conference. Call before them these two brethren, cause them to make sufficient acknowledgement of their sins, or be dealt with according to the law of this church. Closed in prayer by Joseph Smith, Jr. And that's really all we get. I'm not sure what the abuse was. Apparently they said it out loud in this meeting, but that didn't satisfy the parents, and so it became a huge problem, and that was that. So footnote 1 to this says, here, a portion of text recording the decision of the conference appears to be missing, probably because of a scribal error. So yeah, sometimes you just don't write it down. So I have no idea what this means, but a 17-year-old and another guy, I guess, offered abuse, whatever that means, to a little girl, and consternation ensued, and there was conferences held and all sorts of stuff. So back at this time, I guess one of the points of this whole thing is that the church was still pretty small, and so they could deal with these little tiffs amongst themselves. That is far from the truth today. Most people will never even come into any sort of close contact with a leader at this time. I mean, there's one for every million of us, so it's just not a thing we do anymore. But yeah, that's a weird conference, in my opinion. After this, we get an October 25th and 26th conference of the church. So over 2 days. And there's a lot of really fun stuff in here. It's kind of a long minute, so I'm going to break it down just a little bit here. But the historical introduction gives us this. This was the first general conference since members of the church had been ordained to the high priesthood in June 1831. And it provided an opportunity for Joseph Smith and Rigdon to offer instructions concerning the power of that priesthood. Minutes of the June 1831 meeting do not provide much information about what was said to those ordained to the high priesthood, making it difficult to assess how the ordination was understood at that time. But Levi Hancock, who was present at the June conference, later recalled a conversation he had in January 1832 with Lyman White, who ordained several individuals to the high priesthood at the June conference. Speaking about the priesthood, Hancock remarked that neither of us understood what it was. I did not understand it, wrote Hancock, and he, White, could give me no light. Let's be honest. Great, you've ordained me to the high priesthood. I have no idea what this means, And to be honest with you, I think that's true even today. We can talk about how organized everything is, but new babies are born, and those babies need to be taught, right? And so, the training has to happen. This, by the way, in my opinion, is one of the reasons why the church has changed its organization to the Aaronic priesthood is almost entirely for young men. Or maybe new converts, but it's really for young men, and to prepare them so that when they do get the higher priesthood, the Melchizedek priesthood, that they've had some experience with it already. So, but yeah, when the church is new, this is what you get. So I thought that was honest and kind of fun. So there is a section where individuals proclaim their commitment to the work of the Lord. So we get this from the historical introduction. The minutes suggest that willingness to relinquish all to God may have been a requirement to obtain the high priesthood, and its power to, quote, seal up the saints unto eternal life. Accordingly, some participants in the 25th, 26th October conference made or renewed a covenant to consecrate all to God. Nearly all who did so had been previously ordained to the high priesthood or were ordained at the conference. Okay, I'm going to give you some portions of this, starting here. Prayer by Brother Simeon Carter, glorious things were then sung. Brother Sidney Rigdon arose and said that he wished to make a few observations connected with the object of our assembling ourselves together. When God works, all may know it. for he always answers the prayers of the Savior, for he makes his children one. For he, by his Holy Spirit, binds their hearts from earth to heaven. And in this thing God had taught his children to sing a new song, even about Zion, which David spoke of, etc. God always bears testimony by his presence in counsel to his elders when they assemble themselves in perfect faith and humble themselves before the Lord, and their wills being swallowed up in the will of God. So, going back to the beginning of this, it says, glorious things were then sung. Footnote 3 to this says, probably the traditional hymn, glorious things of thee are spoken. The conference held in Missouri on the 4th of August, 1831, also opened by singing this hymn. So I'm going to be generous here and say maybe the singing was glorious, but the title of the song was also Glorious Things. So, just to kind of clarify that. So yeah, a very interesting conference, and I would say very good counsel by Brother Rigdon about, if you come with the proper intent, the Lord will bless your efforts if you're elders in the church. So Joseph Smith gives a speech. So I'm going to quote this one here. It says, Brother Joseph Smith Jr. said, we have assembled together to do the business of the Lord, and it is through the great mercy of our God that we are spared to assemble together. Many of us have went at the command of the Lord in defiance of every evil thing, and obtained blessings unspeakable, in consequence of which our names are sealed in the Lamb's book of life. For the Lord hath spoken it. It is the privilege of every elder to speak of the things of God, etc. And could we all come together with one heart and one mind in perfect faith, the veil might as well be rent today as next week or any other time. And if we will but cleanse ourselves and covenant before God to serve him, it is our privilege to have an assurance that God will protect us at all times. So there you go. Topics were then introduced. John Whitmer was concerned that portions of the Articles and Covenants were not being respected, for example. Frederick G. Williams gets up, wanted to know about migrating families and how to care for them properly. Sidney Rigdon said that this people was meant to be sealed up to God. And then we get this. Brother Joseph Smith Jr. said that the order of the high priesthood is that they have power given them to seal up the saints unto eternal life, and said it was the privilege of every elder present to be ordained to the high priesthood. So I guess the intention is that all of them were supposed to eventually get to that point, which I would say is culturally true inside of the church today. Like, if you live in the church for long enough, just by virtue of your age, you're made a high priest eventually. So that may have changed recently with the abolishment of the high priest groups in each ward, but that's what the culture's been for a long time. So there you go. The ordained priesthood then sort of announced or reiterated their decision to the work, each in their turn. So a lot of them you'll see here in the document, like it's just, so-and-so gets up and says he's, willing to do things and so forth and so on. It just goes on and on like this for a while. So lest I be repetitive, I'm not going to read all those out to you, but each one of these men get up and sort of proclaims or maybe reconfirms their dedication to this work that they're a part of. There's a quote here that I wanted to bring up I thought was very interesting. Brother Hiram Smith said that he thought best that the information of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon be related by Joseph himself to the elders present, that all might know for themselves. Brother Joseph Smith Jr. said that it was not intended to tell the world all the particulars of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, and also said that it was not expedient for him to relate these things, etc. So Hiram Smith, who's like such a favorite child in church history, kind of says, hey, Joseph, why don't you tell us about the Book of Mormon? And he says, no. So there you go. What I find funny is that we start off with that now in modern church teaching. Like we'll start off with like the first vision and the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. So I guess in a way we've gone against this little, the meetings of this, the minutes of this meeting rather. Anyway, but just kind of a funny little, I guess the brothers did not agree here in this moment. So the evening session ended with a call to help with the revision of the Bible. Quote, the clerk begged the privilege of laying before the conference in the evening the necessity of sending certain elders to visit the churches and obtain means for the support of Brother Joseph Smith Jr. and those appointed to assist him in writing the copying the fullness of the Scriptures, as was concluded upon in a conference held in Hiram, October 11th, 1831. So, that's the end of the day. And they said, we need to go around and gather up some money so that Joseph and Sidney Rigdon can finish what they call the fullness of the scriptures, which is sort of the revision of the Bible, the Old Testament, New Testament, what we now call the Joseph Smith translation. So next morning comes around and they agree to do just that. We get this, quote, Brothers Orson Hyde, Simeon Carter, Emer Harris, and Hiram Smith were appointed and ordained agreeably to a motion of the clerk to visit the churches agreeably to the conference. Agreeably. The day ends with various people being ordained to offices in the priesthood, or advanced, as we would like to say today. Some rebukes are doled out about indifference to the offices they were ordained to, and certain brethren actually said, I hear you, and I accept that. I accept that rebuke. We're not doing what we should. Interesting. That's done in the conference. Oliver Cowdery mentions the need to find the 12 apostles. So this is going back a couple of months now, and they still haven't quite done that yet. But it says something here that's interesting. Quote, be ordained and sent forth from the land of Zion, implying that knowing the site of Zion was an important launching point for the calling of the 12. So I find that interesting, is that this edict that they had, like the 3 witnesses to the Book of Mormon, you need to go out and find the 12 apostles. Apparently in this meeting, Oliver says, we now know where Zion is, so now we can do this job again. So they've been kind of putting it off for a little bit. So that's all the stuff. We're going to conclude with what we're used to, which is a section from the Doctrine and Covenants. So this is section 66. So we're out of order here, but bear with me. I'm going to go in the order that the Joseph Smith Papers puts them in. So the first copy of this one is actually on 2 loose pages in the back of William McClelland's notebook. It's the earliest copy that we have. And we're not quite sure if it was sewn in or if it was jammed in there, but like it was just found in his notebook. It is in the handwriting of William E. McClelland. And the wear marks kind of make it impossible to know what the actual relationship was to the book, where it was torn out or just placed in there. But we get this from the source note. It says, the notebook containing the revelation, along with other William E. McClelland documents, was apparently inherited by McClelland's widow, Emmeline Miller McClelland, who gave the documents to J.L. Tauber, Jr. of, I think it's Duquette, Texas. Tauber apparently acquired these items in 1884, when he also obtained a copy of the Book of Commandments from McClelland's widow. Tauber sold the documents to the LDS Church in 1908. These documents were kept in the vault of the church's first presidency until 1986, when they were loaned to the Historical Department, now the Church History Department, and later custody was permanently transferred to the Church History Library. And I think I've said this before, but it used to be that the first presidencies sort of had their own vault of documents, and there was an archive in the basement of the Salt Lake Temple. Those have all been moved to a specifically designed building called the Church History Library, and there they sit to this day. And some of them are kind of moved over and kind of like, okay, these still belong to the first presidency, but you can have them. But I would say, coincidentally, around the time the Joseph Smith Papers happened, a lot of stuff was permanently held over there and is kept very professionally. These documents are kept very well. A copy of this is also found in Revelation Book 1. There's not a big fanfare of an introduction to this. It's actually quite small writing. They didn't do big flourishing, whatever. We do get some verse numbering from W.W. Phelps. The last name of Samuel H. Smith is written in the hand of Joseph Smith, which is kind of fun. And then we get some grammatical changes by John Whitmer. It's also in Revelation Book 2, and there are no corrections here at all. So Revelation 2 is a really clean copy, and that's in the handwriting of Frederick G. Williams. We are done with the Book of Commandments, so nothing more in that book. So it's just, again, thank you for your service there. It is section 74 in the Doctrine and Covenants from 1835, and a copy is found in the manuscript history of the church. Those are the contemporary documents from Joseph's life that we have. So let's get into an introduction into the content itself. So section 66. For starters, it comes before section 65, but whatever. We don't get anything from William E. McClelland's notebook papers, and it could have been something was lost, but there is no introduction at all. Revelation Book 1 gives us a revelation to William E. McClelland received October 29th, 1831. Very simple. Revelation Book 2 gives us about the same thing. It says, Revelation, to William E. McClelland, October 1831. We get a lot more from the manuscript history, which gives a brief summary of the conference we just talked about, and then gives us this. It says, at the conference on the 25th at Orange, 12 high priests, 17 elders, 4 priests, 3 teachers, and 4 deacons, together with a large congregation, attended. Much business was done, and the 4 remaining committee, authorized by the conference at Hiram on the 11th, were appointed and consisted of Simeon Carter, Orson Hyde, Hiram Smith, and Emer Harris. At the request of William E. McClellan, I inquired of the Lord and received the following revelation given October 1831. So this was a requested revelation from the prophet. So that's contemporary. So the historical introduction to Volume 1 of the document series says, on 29th of October 1831, William E. McClellan wrote in his journal, the Lord condescended to hear my prayer and give me a revelation of his will through his prophet or seer, Joseph. McClellan, a recent convert from Paris, Illinois, met Joseph Smith for the first time at the 25th-26th October conference in Orange, Cayuga County, Ohio, where McClellan was ordained to the high priesthood. At the conclusion of the conference, he accompanied Joseph Smith to Hiram, Ohio, arriving there on the 29th of October. McClellan later recalled that on that day, he went before the Lord in secret, and on my knees asked him to reveal the answer to 5 questions through his prophet. At McClellan's request, Joseph Smith dictated a revelation for him, perhaps in the southeast upstairs bedroom of the John and Alice, or Elsa, Jacobs, Johnson home. So at McClellan's request, Joseph Smith dictated a revelation for him, perhaps in the southeast upstairs bedroom of the John and Alice Johnson home, where Joseph Smith worked on his revision of the Bible. According to McClellan, a revelation answered the questions, quote, to my full and entire satisfaction, unquote. Although McClellan never explained what his 5 queries were, the revelation's contents indicate that he was probably concerned about his standing before God and what the Lord desired him to do. I really, really wish we knew what those 5 questions were. I think that would be kind of fun. But he had 5 questions, and those 5 were answered, apparently. So that's kind of fun. Footnote 5 to this says, from the historical introduction, by the way, this translating room was the largest room upstairs and probably originally the bedroom of John and Alice Jacob Johnson. The Johnsons created a new bedroom by partitioning off a single large workspace on the west end of the 2nd floor into 2 smaller rooms. While Joseph Smith was attending the October conference in Orange, much of the work was done by the time Joseph Smith and McClellan reached the Johnson home on the 29th of October. But the partition wall was not plastered until that evening. When you can get down to the point where you know when the plaster was drying, that's some pretty impressive historical stuff there. So whoever said that, whoever found that, Joseph Smith Papers people, my hat's off to you. So this was written here and in a journal, and some additions were made to the end. So from the historical introduction again, it says the notebook version also appears to be more complete than the copy in Revelation Book 1 because the notebook contains an endnote regarding McClellan belonging to the lineage of Ephraim in the Old Testament, a note that also appears in the journal copy. So from the text of this is what you get. A revelation given to William E. McClellan, a true descendant from Joseph, who was sold into Egypt, down through the loins of Ephraim his son. And I spoke about this in a previous part, but yeah, this Ephraim tribe had the promise, and this is from Deuteronomy, and also the blessings of Abraham to his children, Israel to his children, that Ephraim would be the one that would sort of push them back. And you get that language a lot, pushing them to Zion, pushing them to the temple. That is the job of Ephraim, even though those tribes had some intertribal warfare, but that's the promise. So you hear that a lot in church literature. So let's get in a little bit of the content footnotes here. We get this from the text. It says, behold, verily I say unto you that it is my will that you should proclaim my gospel from land to land and from city to city, yea, in those regions round about where it hath not been proclaimed. Tarry not many days in this place. Go not up unto the land of Zion as yet, but inasmuch as you can send, send. Otherwise, think not of thy property. Go unto eastern lands, bear testimony in every place, unto every people, in their synagogues, reasoning with the people. And just as a clarification here, the synagogue idea is not like a Jewish synagogue. It was meant as like a general place of gathering. Although they probably wouldn't have shied away from it. But, the synagogue idea is like this would have been like a church or a chapel, wherever it may be. Footnote 5 to this says, according to McClellan, I had expected to remain here and read and write for some weeks and probably months, but having received the will of the Lord, I determined to obey it. Therefore, McClellan continued, I only remained here in Hiram about 3 weeks. So he was like, hey, I'm going to stay here. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm going to leave in 3 weeks. And such it is in the early church. They were bouncing all over the place sometimes. We get a little further into the text. It says, seek not to be cumbered, forsake all unrighteousness, commit not adultery, a temptation with which thou hast been troubled. Footnote 13 is very interesting for this. It says, exactly how McClellan had been tempted with adultery is unclear. His wife, Cynthia Ann, whom he married in 1829, had died recently, leaving McClellan to experience, quote, many lonesome and sorrowful hours. So, and just as a reminder, this is 1831, so they were married for 2 years before she died, probably less than that. And so he was in mourning, but for some reason, that was considered, I guess, a temptation for him. Not really sure where that comes from. And that's all we get from section 66, and that is the end of part 2. So thanks for sticking with us. We have one more part. The only thing we're going to do with it is section 65, so stick with us, and we'll finish this up. And we're going to finish up part 3 with section 65 as we now have it today in the Doctrine and Covenants. And again, a little out of order, 65 coming after 66, but it's okay. The first copy that we get is from Revelation Book 1, handwriting of John Whitmer. And we do get one edition of text here. It is cut out of, which is in the hand of Joseph Smith. So context here is, and the stone which is hewn down or hewn from is removed, and it's replaced with cut out of the mountain. So the text as we have it now is, as the stone which is cut out of the mountain. And this is, I think, an analogy to, or a hearkening back to Daniel's prophecy of the kingdom of God overtaking the kingdoms of this world, the stone cut out of the mountain. So anyway, that is an addition, a correction made by Joseph Smith's hand. I talked about this in a previous episode, but we get number 3, which is a publication number set that wasn't quite obeyed. So I think they were intending on something there, but it never came to pass. But anyway, number 3 is also written here. And then we get the number 65, which is written very lightly, and then it was written and then erased, but it's very, very small here. And the footnote in the facsimile edition of this says, this revelation has appeared as section 65 in all editions of the Doctrine and Covenants published by the RLDS Church, which is now called the Community of Christ. So that number 65 has been honored in their publications since that time. Another copy of this, apparently, which was later on, was also found in the same journal book as the previous pages. So this is the handwriting of William E. McClellan. So if you remember that journal from the previous part, that's where you also get a copy of this. The Evening and Morning Star has a version of this one. It comes after what we would now call section 29 and before what we would now call Jacob chapter 5 from the Book of Mormon. So in the periodical, that's just kind of where this sits. And as you can see, it's a lot more brief than the other ones are. But we find it in this periodical, the Evening and Morning Star. You'll find a copy of it in Revelation Book 2. And it is section 24 in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. And the manuscript history also has a copy of it. So that's what we get. Now, our modern section headings give us some differences here. So the 1981 version gives us Hiram, Ohio, et cetera, book, blah, blah, blah. Then it says, the prophet designated this revelation as a prayer. Now, the 2013 edition says, revelation on prayer given through Joseph Smith the prophet at Hiram, Ohio, October 30, 1831. So, is it a prayer or is it about prayer? The answer is yes, it is. We'll get to that in a moment. So it is about prayer, and it also gives a prayer towards the end, which is interesting. So let's get into an introduction to section 65. Revelation Book 1 gives us this. 69th Revelation, October 30th, 1831. That's all you get. Revelation Book 2 says, revelation given in Hiram, Portage County, October 30, 1830. And then it corrects it to 1831. So there you go. McClellan's copy actually does have an introduction here. It says, a revelation of Joseph the seer, 30th of October, 1831, on the 6th Matthew 10 verse. So if you go to Matthew chapter 6, verse 10, it is the Lord's Prayer. And in this particular case, he's quoting, it says, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So for some reason, he called that one out specifically. So that's what we're talking about, is the Lord's Prayer. Evening and Morning Star gives us a nice bold heading. It says Revelation on Prayer, given October 30, 1831. And the Doctrine and Covenants also calls it a revelation on prayer, given October 1831. We get very little in the manuscript history this time around, which is kind of opposite of what we usually get. It says, in the forepart of October, I received the following, Revelation on Prayer, given October 1831. Now, the historical introduction gives us probably more than anyone else. We thank you. It says this, the revelation which declares that the keys of God's kingdom have been returned to the earth to prepare it for the second coming of Jesus Christ culminates with a prayer for the growth of that kingdom. The revelation may have been dictated as part of a church service held at John and Alice Johnson's home on Sunday, 30th October, 1831. McClellan wrote in his journal that he preached there that day in a meeting attended by Joseph Smith and several others of the brethren and sisters. McClellan did not refer to this revelation in his journal, but since Joseph Smith was present, this may have been the venue where the revelation was dictated. Okay, so probably as part of a church service held in their home, which kind of cool. You think about a prophet living with you and he's holding church services in your house and you got to be a part of all that. It's kind of special. So it is a revelation about prayer, and then at the end offers a prayer. So it is both. And I think that's why it's kind of in both cases there. So who comes first? Well, it is difficult to determine which of the two is the earliest extant version, but because Whitmer's copy, which he included in Revelation Book 1, and which is featured here, shows less punctuation, it may more closely represent the original. So if you're wondering why we're not using this thing in the back of William McClellan's notebook as opposed to Revelation Book 1, they just made their best guess based on how much punctuation it had. Again, a forensic scientist point of view that I do not have because I am the amateur historian, and I'm okay with that. So a little bit of content and footnotes. We really only get 2 footnotes for this review. A lot of the other ones are scriptural references. Obviously, we're talking about the Lord's Prayer and other things that are from the New Testament and scriptures that we have. But I do get 2, and I'll give you those, and then we'll be done with this part. Pretty short one here. So the content gives us this. It says, the keys of the kingdom of God is committed unto man on the earth, and from thence shall the gospel roll forth unto the ends of the earth. As the stone which is hewn from the mountain without hands shall roll forth until it have filled the whole earth. Footnote 3 to this says, the New Testament records Christ telling Peter that he would receive the keys of the kingdom of heaven. A 15 March 1832 revelation declares that the Lord gave Joseph Smith the keys of the kingdom. Likewise, a history that Joseph Smith composed circa summer 1832 states that Joseph Smith also received the keys of the kingdom of God. And also, again, just to reiterate, this whole, the stone which is hewn from the mountain was changed by Joseph Smith's hands, that was cut from. Just a little addition there. Further into the revelation, we get this text. It says, known his wonderful works among the people, call upon the Lord that his kingdom may go forth upon the earth, that the inhabitants thereof may receive it, and be prepared for the days to come, in the which the Son of Man shall come down in heaven, clothed in the brightness of his glory, to meet the kingdom of God, which is set up upon the earth. Footnote 7 to this says, about the same time as this revelation was dictated, Joseph Smith revised Mark 38, chapter 8, 38 to read, quote, he that layeth down his life for my sake and the gospel's shall come with him, and shall be clothed with his glory in the cloud on the right hand of the Son of Man, unquote. And those are the 2 footnotes that you get. A little bit of context there. A very short revelation and a very short part. So thanks for sticking with us today. We got some meetings and stuff. We're kind of getting into the part of the Joseph Smith papers where we're getting away from just revelations and getting a lot more into record keeping. And so hopefully this has been somewhat interesting to understand not only these meetings, but what truly led up to some of these revelations, the reason why people were spoken to in a certain way and all that. So until that time, this is the amateur historian saying thank you again. to the Book of Commandments and to the Reorganized Church and the Community of Christ for doing an excellent job preserving that. And now we move on to more things as we continue in the Doctrine and Covenants. So have a great week, and we'll see you later.